Hello. I know you guys are all watching this at different times with your teams, so I'm not sure whether it's morning or afternoon for you. But the reason that we're sharing this through video is that your teams thought it would be a good idea to go through this and do some thinking and some adjustments to how we want to plan for our first units together instead of everybody viewing videos separately and not being able to ask questions and all that stuff. So what I'm showing you in this video is how we feel like we can modify the playlist we learned together last week, or actually expand on it or enhance it, not really modify it in any way, but expand it so that it can become our unit plans for the year. So we're always prepared virtually, but we're prepared to be in person also. I'm going to try not to take a whole lot of time because I'm hoping to be available to your teams after they watch this and to do some small group coaching sessions to help you get this first unit planned and ready to go in this format. So last week we talked a lot about the playlist and setting things up for our students in a playlist format so that they could easily follow what we wanted them to do if we're in a virtual setting. This just extends or really kind of plus ones that idea into a plan that takes everything we typically do, including the best things off of our instructional models, and puts them into a unit plan that works for us, but that also works for kids virtually and is friendly no matter who is looking at it, whether it's us, a student, a parent, whatever. And it is even going to take into account when kids need more help and when kids are ready to dig deeper. So you're going to have a blank template of this shared with you, and you can just make copies. And it looks like this. You can make it as pretty as you want to as you go, and we can talk more about how to do that later if you're interested in it. But I tend to like things just simple and clean. So you'd put your title up here of whatever your unit was, and then your first unit for the class you're working on, the standards for that whole unit. It might be one standard because it's an intro unit. You might be doing some review of standards you know they didn't get at the end of last year, or this unit might have 2 or 3 standards in it. But that's the very first thing you're going to do is write your standards out at the top. So one of mine would be to cite thorough, if I can spell, thorough and specific evidence to support a claim. And everybody in the English department is probably going to email me and tell me that's not exactly how that's worded, but that's what we're going with today. So if that's my standard for my unit, then the very first thing I'm going to do underneath that is what's the first learning target. So if I were looking at this like my instructional model, what is the first target from this instructional model from last year that I know my students really need and I know is something that can be done virtually, that they can do to a skill that they can do to proficiency. So it might be that because this is a review, it might be I can write a clear claim to support an argument or something like that. So it's that very first I can statement, and we're going to do that before we do anything else. So then what we're going to do is we're going to turn these columns into a playlist that builds on itself until we have a complete unit plan. I'm actually going to jump over in a second and show you one that is a little bit more completed from a sample we did in a training earlier this week. So the first column is we're going to do, I want to make sure I word this correctly, must-dos for virtual learning. So our first column is always going to be the must-dos for virtual learning, because we've said if we're prepared for virtual learning, we are prepared for anything. And that's all we're going to focus on right now. For this target, what are the must-dos for virtual learning? So I'm going to jump over to the one that we used today when we were brainstorming. And I want you to look just at this first column. So in this first column, all we're doing is putting the non-negotiables that students would have to do to get that first learning target. And this was kind of a sample that I shared. I was thinking social studies when I was mocking this one up. So a thinking question, which would traditionally be our bell ringer. Then what would we do with kids next in a virtual setting? We might have them do a video for some background knowledge or some context. There might be some direct instruction, because again, we're so used to thinking in our instructional models for last year. We're still going to think that way. We're still going to use those things because we already have them. Then we might do a thinking map with vocabulary. Since we're already working on some background knowledge, we know that something that's going to get them to that target might have to be vocabulary. And then because this was a social studies and I was thinking some literacy and some thinking skills, might give them a primary source article with some annotation. But for that first target, if I couldn't do anything else in a virtual setting, I am kind of laying out very generally at first what would be those non-negotiables. So that's what you're going to put in this first column. The second column is the face-to-face column. So you're going to label that face-to-face. These are the things that if you get to be face-to-face, you want to be able to do with your kids still toward this learning target. So if we look at the one over here, you can see that it's kind of lined up. So in a face-to-face setting, we would still do the make me think question, the bell ringer question that's prompting them to think. But if we're face-to-face, I probably want to do a think, pair, share with that in a class discussion so that they're interacting more face-to-face with one another. For the video, for background information, that's good by itself no matter what. I don't need anything to pair with that face-to-face. But if we're face-to-face, I'm just not going to do a lecture. I'm going to have them jigsaw part of that because that's something I love to do in my classroom and it works really well. And if I don't have to, I don't want to give that up. So if I'm face-to-face with my kids, we're going to do this non-negotiable, but we're going to do this too because it works. Same thing with the thinking map. I like to do gallery walks for them to do vocabulary so they can take mobile notes and be up and moving, and I can still do that. And that would be a really great thing to do face-to-face in the first unit, so I'm going to do that. And then I'll probably, if I'm in a face-to-face situation, also do a Socratic seminar with this primary source article because it probably has a point or a perspective that we can have some debate back and forth about. So the second column is what I get to do if I get to be face-to-face. So we've got the must-dos and the face-to-face task. And really we could stop there. And we talked about that when we first started brainstorming this in the small group that did the blended learning and professional development. We had some conversation around that could really be the whole plan. But we know we continue to have these conversations about, like, what do I do with the kids that get finished too soon? What do I do with the kids who don't feel challenged? What do I do with the kids who need more help because I'm not quite sure when they might be struggling or if they might be struggling? So the next two columns are pre-planning for those situations. So the next two columns are going to be, we're going to call them the I'm ready for more column and the I'm getting there, please send help column. So the reason we're calling those two, naming those two columns that way is we don't want to call this the high flyer and the struggler column because kids are going to see this and use this in the same way or even more than we are. So we want it to prompt them in a really positive way. realistically, our kids who are ready for more are probably going to do everything we put in every column unless we're not face to face, just because they won't be able to do that. But they're going to be prompted, oh, well, I've got time to do more than that. I want to do more than that. I need to do more than that. I'm going to do what's in this column. Or, I mean, I kind of get it, but I could use some help. I'm going to do this to help me. And we're going to be able to talk through and prompt them through that, whether we're virtual or in person. So we do the same thing. We just go in and say, okay, for kids who need more, which non-negotiables in this very first column would I +1 for those kids? Would I take those kids, give those kids an opportunity to go deeper? And you might find that there are times that we all do that. And it's not going to be for everything. And so in this example for that target, there are just a couple of ways a kid who's ready for more can take it further. Same thing with the column for kids who we know are probably going to struggle. We know where they probably are going to struggle. They're not going to struggle with the bell ringer because that's about compliance. That's about them just doing that, whether it's right or it's wrong. But by the time we get down to direct instruction, that might be where they struggle with understanding. So what could we go ahead and pre-plan to prompt them to do to help themselves and give them some ways that will help them? Again, this works virtually. It works whether we're face-to-face, because they're looking going, oh, I'm struggling with that. That's my non-negotiable. I need to do this. I don't think I did that thinking map correctly. I'm not getting great feedback from my partner on that. I need to get in that small group that tries it again. So this column is for the support. How are we going to support students who are struggling? And going ahead and having it pre-planned so they can see it and they're prompted to do it. And then the last column is the how do we know we're learning column. And that is our assessment column. And so we do not need for a target to have any more than 3 places where we will assess per target. It might only be 1, but we're not going to do any more than 3. And that's where we're going to go ahead and jot down right now in the pre-planning stages how we will assess. And you can see a couple of those examples here. For the video, to know that they've watched and they understand it, and they're probably doing this analysis question, particularly if they're ready for more, they need a rubric to self-assess for that analysis question and a place to put how they scored themselves, because they're going to use this as much or more than we are. And then you can see this is where we would put the link to the reflection form for everybody's assessment for this particular target. So our goal is to lay all of our units out with this type of playlist formatted this way. And the first thing we're going to do is just generally outline it like this. And this is what we're going to be working on and workshopping together. Then we will go in and start creating the things we need to create and linking the things we need to link. That's where we'll put the links to where they turn something in on Google Classroom, the links to the video we want them to watch, the link to the form we want them to fill out, all of those things. We're not creating yet. We're just getting a generalized outline. It's not super general. It doesn't just have the topic. It has specific tasks, but it doesn't have the question written out yet. I'm giving myself permission as I outline this unit to go back and do those specific things later. So this is what your team's going to be talking about today and brainstorming. It is just an extension of what we started last week. So for the playlist you already have started, you're just going to drop it into this template and take it a couple of steps further. But these couple of steps we're taking it further are going to save us a ton of time in the long run. So as you watch this, if you want to go back and watch it again and jot down some questions, or as your team comes up with questions, I think I'm going to be joining you as you work on this, and I'll answer any questions you have and help you out the very best I can. This is what is going to allow us to keep all of our kids who are choosing virtual with us instead of them bouncing in and out of stuff in Edgenuity. And I think it's going to be really seamless and work really well for us. And I think it really simplifies and makes everything really visual and all in one place for what we're trying to accomplish. And I think we're in a place now where we have the skills and the know-how to do this, because we already know which highly effective tasks and activities we're going to have our kids do. So I think this just goes right in line with everything we've been doing. It just puts it in a format that makes a unit plan a plan and a process to follow, not just for us, but for our kids as well. And I think this year especially, that's going to be really powerful to keep us moving where we want to go. So you guys start brainstorming and planning, jot some questions down as you go, and hopefully I'll be with you as you're meeting and talking about this to help you out.